Hey everyone, welcome to Two Car Pros. My name is Ryan, and today we will be completing our How to Build a Big Block Chevy series. In this video, we're going to be showing you how to change the oil, cut the filter open, check for any kind of metal chunks or bearing material, in which case you would need to stop and basically rebuild the engine. Hopefully you don't run into that. If you follow all the steps we did in the previous videos, you won't run into that at all. We're also going to recheck tightness on some bolts where the gasket material is, just because as the engine heats up and cools down, that gasket material can flatten out more and swedge out, and you really want to recheck this, especially after you've been running the engine for a little while and it's gotten hot and gotten cold. So you really want to recheck that. We go over that as well. We also show you exactly how to set your ignition timing for a really cool street engine like this. It's pretty tricky. You definitely don't want to miss out on that. And we also show you how to set your idle mixture using a vacuum gauge. We'll go over that later on in the video. And then the final piece to the puzzle is going to be our air filter. So I wanted to explain how this series came to be. If you want to skip ahead to the wrenching, here is a timestamp for that. But I went over this a little bit in the last video, but I want to go over it again because I think it's relevant. This series basically started as, well, I have a 67 Camaro, my dream car, and it came with a 327 in it, and that was junk. It was leaking oil everywhere. That engine definitely needed a rebuild, and I was stuck. Basically, what engine did I want to put in my car? You know, I was torn between a small block Chevy, which is what it came with, a big block Chevy, which is exceedingly cool, or an LS, which is the cliche for a reason choice. And the LS is probably would have been the number 2 choice I would have picked for sure, just because it's so convenient and modern, and fuel injection is a joy. But I didn't want to go that route for this reason. I wanted it to be carbureted. I wanted it to be traditional to the 67 Camaro. Yeah, they never put a 454 in the Camaro. They put a 427 in if you had a Copo, but that's exceedingly rare. They did put the 396 big block in there, but never a 454. I think that was reserved for the bigger cars and the Corvette. So I thought it'd be cool to, you know, kind of transport myself back in time. What would I have done in like the 1970s? Well, you would have done what everyone did, and you would have gotten an old truck, pulled the engine out of it, and you would have put it in your Camaro. You would have done a big block swap because everybody did. Actually, my uncle even has a 68 Camaro with a 502, I think, in it. It's a little bit bigger engine than mine, but it's still a big block Chevy. The relative, you know, size is exactly the same. So that was a little bit of inspiration there. And then, you know, my grandfather and my dad were really into hot rodding in the, you know, all the way from the 60s until, I mean, basically now. And my grandfather passed away, unfortunately, in 2018, and he taught my dad, who taught me how to build engines. And you know, I'd built small blocks in the past and stuff, but I'd never done a big block before. And I thought it would be really cool to kind of honor my grandfather and my dad to build this big block Chevy exactly how they would have built it back in the day. Their legacy lives on, and I think that is so cool that it is here on YouTube. Also, growing up, I used to wake up early to watch Power Block TV, I forget on which channel, where they would put together engines and really cool things, but you know, it was like an overproduced TV show, and it's on TV, it's overproduced, it's kind of the way it is, and they kind of have their hands bound when it comes to showing actual information. They can show little tidbits in here, but they have a producer, and they have a budget, and they have, you know, an expected outcome, and it has to fit within that 22-minute block, or 44-minute if you have an hour-long show. So the amount of things they actually can show is kind of limited. So you really never, ever, ever saw a hand-holdy, step-by-step, this bolt is this torque, you put it in just like this, wire to wire. And I always thought, why not? Well, the reason on TV is because, well, it's TV, but on YouTube, there is no why not. There just is. You just do it. And I thought that'd be exceedingly cool to get rid of all of that gatekeeping. No more elitism. I can't stand that kind of thing. I want this to be accessible by anybody who knows how to turn a wrench, and it absolutely is. You could sit down knowing an okay amount of knowledge about automotive, just knowing how to turn wrenches basically, very basic knowledge. You could sit down, watch this entire playlist here on YouTube, and know exactly how to build a big block Chevrolet. And that is exceedingly cool. I'm so grateful all of you have been here supporting me, liking these videos. Honestly, I didn't even think that this engine series would take off like it has. It's done very, very well. I'm very happy and proud and grateful for everyone to have been subbing and commenting and liking and telling me your opinions and sharing how excited you are to hear it run. You know, that was such a boon for me to read and see all that support. It was incredible. I kind of thought it was just going to be like this side thing that I did to get my Camaro running. You know, my bread and butter is really automotive repair, not so much building custom big blocks, but it was really, really cool to see the response from you guys, the viewers, the subscribers, and I can't tell you how grateful I am. With all of that out of the way, let's jump into this engine for the final time. So now that our engine's been running for a little while now, what we can do is check our breather here for any signs of coolant. Basically around here, it'll be like a milkshake. It'll be like a chocolate milkshake from In-N-Out or something. And all I see is just a teeny bit of moisture, which is totally normal just because of the engine heating up and cooling down, but there is absolutely no milkshake in here, so that's good, and we can move on to our dipstick. So now we can check our dipstick. And basically, on the end of our dipstick, we just want to make sure that doesn't have any milkshake look, and this doesn't. It's absolutely pristine. You know, look really closely, see if there's any metal specks or metal flecks, and there's not. All that's on here is decently clean oil. You might see a little bit of darkness on my middle finger there. That's just moly lube from the break-in lube that is on the camshaft. Don't worry about that because this is not metal. See how nice and smooth it feels? That is just lubrication, so now what we can do is drain the oil. So the next thing we're going to do is drain the oil, but this is going to be a little bit different than maybe a typical oil change for you, because what I want to do is have the first quart or two, because I want the first quart or two to end up in my stainless steel bowl here, so I can look if there's any glitters in the oil, because if there's any glitter bearing material, it's going to end up at the bottom of our pan, and that's going to be basically the first quart out. So that's all I really need to look at, and then the rest of that can go into my refuse oil catch. So we can grab a 3/4 inch wrench or socket and remove our drain plug. There we go. You might have seen some gray there, but that is just moly lube off of our break-in cam lube we had on there earlier. And then I'm just gonna go ahead and move my bowl over to my workbench so I can take a look at it. And then the rest of this oil can just go into my refuse oil. So I have our stainless steel container here with about the first quart or two of our oil, our drain plug from earlier, and then what I have over here is a nice white piece of paper and I've got some oil and smeared on there. And what we can do is take a flashlight and really look at it and see if there's any glinting, any glitters, and there's absolutely none. It is completely glitterless. It is just oil in there, which is always encouraging. You can also take a look at the end of our drain bolt here, because it does have a magnet on the end of it, which is always good. So any kinds of metal chunks are going to be attracted to this magnet. And you can see on the end there, we have just a little bit of that moly lube on there, because there is a little bit of metal in there. But look how fine it is. See how there is a little bit of metal here. Metal on metal did happen. That it's an engine, that's what happens. But see how nice and fine it is? See how it's almost like a powder? It's like baby powder. How soft it is? This is totally fine. I'm just gonna clean this up, replace this washer, and this is all good to go here. And then the final test I like doing is with our first second quart of our oil change here. Any big chunks of bearing material would have settled to the bottom, and I have a nice clean magnet here, and we can just go fishing for a while. Go all the way through this. You can even have a little bit less oil in here, so maybe you can see down in there, but it's gonna be a little cloudy due to that moly lube. All right, been fishing around for a while, and you can see there's absolutely nothing on the end of my magnet, no big chunks, just a little bit, again, of that extremely fine, moly lube and a teeny bit of metal in there. This is absolutely normal, totally typical of breaking in an engine. So now that our oil is done flowing, we can clean off that mating surface using a little bit of carburetor spray. Make sure that's nice and clean. We don't want any contaminants there. And then our drain bolt, nice and clean with a new washer on there. Go ahead and replace that. And grab our 3/4 inch wrench and just snug that up. Do not go crazy. All it's doing is holding oil back. In fact, I like to choke up on the wrench like this to make sure I don't get too much power. And there we go. All right, so now we can worry about taking our oil filter out. And usually this isn't too much of a problem, but because of our gleaming headers, look how beautiful these are. We don't want to get oil on those. I mean, if you did, it wouldn't be that big of a deal because you could just use some carburetor spray and wipe them off. But I'd rather just prevent the mess with a simple application of cardboard. Perfect. So I have a nice oil filter socket. Alternatively, you could use like a pair of channel locks. Or something like that to remove it like you typically would, but since I have this nice socket, I'm just going to use it because it's on pretty tight. There we go. So at this stage you can actually let the oil come down and wait for it to stop so you don't make a big mess. And there we go. And carefully maneuver our oil filter out of there. So what we're looking at now is where the oil filter actually interfaces with our engine block. And the reason I'm looking at this and not the oil filter is because it's a good practice to be in to make sure there's absolutely no remnants of an O-ring or anything like that. And especially if you're working on a car that you didn't build the engine for, it's good practice to be in because the last guy could have left it an O-ring on there and it double O-ring and it miraculously sealed and everything was fine, but that's not going to work for you. So it's a really good idea just to look up in there. And then what I like to do too is grab a terry towel with a little bit of carburetor spray on it and just wipe that mating surface nice and clean. This likes to be nice and clean because you're going to put another film of oil on it when you put the new filter on anyway. So just make sure this mating surface right here is nice and clean. So now we're going to do something kind of fun and exciting. We're going to cut open our oil filter so we can look at the actual paper inside the filter material. And what I have here is a tool to do that safely, because otherwise you have a pretty good chance of cutting yourself really good if you don't have this really nice tool. I got it on Amazon, link down below in the description. And basically what you want to do is set it on top with the jaws open. I like to keep it nice and flat. And then tighten this down pretty good. And then you're just going to follow it around like this. And look at that, it's already cutting excellently. And then some people like to go lightly and then just tighten and then turn and then tighten and turn. There's really no wrong way to do it when you have this tool. Just be really careful because this metal is sharp. Just keep going around like this, making sure that the casing is completely cut. Oh, got a little bit on the back end there. And there we go. Go ahead and be very careful. This metal's very sharp. Go ahead and expose our filter material. So let's just do this. So now what we can do is actually take our filter material out of the canister, make a little bit of a mess. And what we want to do is spread open the paper fins. So you want to spread these fins out and look really deep down in there for any chunks of bearing material, any kind of glints and glitters. And you can just go around. You can check every single fin if you really want to, but I just like to go around every 3 or 4 just to double check that there's no bearing material in here, and there is absolutely zero. This is totally flawless. Some people even like to break out a microscope and look really in depth at the paper. Some people shred it apart looking for any kind of metal. I think it's a little obsessive for a home street build like this. Just using your thumb, spraying it apart and doing a visual inspection like we've just done, this is perfectly flawless, so we can move on. So again, we have our AC Delco oil filter, link down below in the description, and I'm going to be using our Comp Cam's break-in oil again, and you might be saying, why do you need break-in oil again? Well, it's because it has zinc inside of it. Flat tappet cams require zinc, and they used to put zinc in conventional motor oil, but they don't really do that so much anymore, so you can't really count on like Mobile One to have zinc in it. Sometimes they sell zinc additive that you can just put in and you're good to go. But this has the zinc built right in, so we're gonna keep using it. Just like every other oil change, we're gonna go ahead and put a little bit of oil on the end of our finger and go around this seal so there is a nice film on there. Now, because our oil filter is mounted vertically, and it is a pretty old school big block and old school system, we're gonna go ahead and fill up our oil filter. On modern engines, you don't really need to do this so much, especially if the filter is mounted horizontally, because that will fill up within about a second or so. But on these older, really big engines, it's a pretty good idea. So you'll be adding oil to it, and what will happen is you'll fill it up and it will appear to be filled, but don't be fooled because the paper inside there is absorbing all that oil and the level's gonna drop. So keep an eye on it and keep adding it until it's nearly full. Alrighty, we have our oil filter pretty full, and with that film on the O-ring there, and we're just gonna carefully maneuver that up into position. And we can just replace our oil filter here. Making sure we're not cross-threading nothing. Just spin that on into place. Now for tightness, you know, there's a lot of debate about, you know, how tight you should do it. On the can it says snug and then 3/4 turn additional. It's usually a good route to go. I like to just go about as tight as I can get it with one hand or so. There we go. It doesn't have to be crazy tight, because again, it's going to be really difficult to get back off later, as long as it doesn't leak. Now we can replace our engine oil. We're going to put 6 quarts of our Comp Cam's braking oil in, and then check the dipstick. All right, there's quart number 6. Let's go ahead and check that dipstick. All right, 6 quarts in, filter's full. Let's go ahead and check our oil level again. A little tough to see on camera, but the level is right about at the end of my thumb, right on full. That is absolutely perfect. I'm going to check this again after we've started the engine and let it run for a little bit and turn the engine back off and check the level, but on a classic car like this, you should always be checking your oil basically every time you put gas in it, so I'll always have a close eye on that, but that's basically where you want it, on the upper end of full there. Replace our dipstick. And now we can move on. So after our last quart of oil, I can go ahead and remove our funnel and replace our breather. There we go. So now that the engine's been running, you know, hot and cold, that gasket is going to be compressed for the intake manifold. Actually, all the gaskets are really going to be this way on the top end here. So we're just going to want to grab our 9/16 and just snug that up again. It's a little loose. Snug that up again, and do this for all of the intake manifold bolts, and just go around from the inside out in kind of a spiral pattern. And we can apply that same principle to our valve covers here. Again, we're going to be working from the center out. So these are pretty good, but give them a little more of a cinch. And there we go. So again, the same principle of all these gaskets, you know, being flattened out and kind of swedging out a little bit from being heated up and cooled down so often, is you need to tighten them again. And this is kind of the only header bolt that's visible. I've already kind of gone from the inside out. This is actually my last one. I'm gonna go ahead and snug that up. Actually, it was pretty tight, pretty good to begin with, so, but it's good to double check that. You don't want to have an exhaust leak here at the head. And the same principle applies to our oil pan. So we're just going to snug all those up in a nice spiral pattern. See? Turned a little bit, so we're getting a little more sealing out of that. We're just going to go in a spiral pattern, you know, back and forth, exactly the same way we put the pan on. So the next thing we're going to move on to is using our timing light here. And before we get into that, I want to show exactly how it's hooked up. So our first connection here is on our #1 spark plug wire. That's going to actually tell the timing light when to flash. And then we have the black alligator clip going to a ground, any ground, doesn't really matter. And then, because we don't have a battery up here, ours is in the trunk, we have the power on the power side of the coil, because it's only flashing a light it's not that much power, it'll be fine. So what we're gonna do now is adjust our ignition timing, and before we start the car, and it's pretty noisy, I wanna show you how exactly you're going to do that using your distributor. So we're going to loosen that 9/16 bolt using a crow's foot wrench, or they even make wrenches special just for this application. You just want to leave it loose too, but a little snug so it's not flopping around either. So later on in this video, I'm going to be talking about advancing and retarding your timing, and the way you do that is with that loose but snug. You don't want this taking off as soon as you start the engine, because then your timing, who knows what's going to happen. It could be really, really bad. Don't do that. In order to advance our timing on our big block Chevy, we're going to rotate the distributor like that towards this way. And to retard it, you just go the other way, like that. You just push it this way. Advance is to our right, retard is to our left. So here is our timing gauge. This is on our harmonic damper, and you can see that nice white line just there. I've painted that white somewhere way back in the build so you can see it. And what we're going to be doing is looking where it says 0 right there. That is basically going to be our magic number, because we're going to set our timing light at 35 degrees. Usually 38 is pretty much the maximum. Anything beyond 38, you're really not going to see any benefit for. 35 is honestly the sweet spot of where we're going to want it. So we're going to set our timing light to that, and when it's flashing, we're going to be looking down here, and we're going to see this white mark match up with the 0, and we can adjust timing until it does. So here's where we're going to be looking when our engine's at about 3,000 RPM and our timing light at about 35 degrees. And where you're going to be looking is where this white mark flashes. That's why I painted it white. It's quite a bit easier to see on film especially. And when the timing light flashes and you see this white mark and it's up here like it is currently, that means it is too far advanced and you need to retard your timing. The inverse is true if it's lower. If it's too far down here, it's too retarded and you need to advance it. Until it's flashing right at the end of my screwdriver, you want this to base this white line when it's flashing to be right here on the 0. So now we're going to flick our light to on and then put our dial right on 35 degrees. Perfect. So we're going to start the engine, and before we do, double check and make sure your timing light wires are nowhere near anything that moves. So on my timing gun, I've set it at about 9 degrees, and you can see that at idle, it has 9 degrees advance. But that's still good. We want to do final advance. So we need to put the engine at about 3,000 RPM and put our timing light back at 35 degrees. And now the engine's at about 3,500 RPM. I'm sorry if you can't hear me, but I've adjusted the timing. It was actually a little retarded. I had to advance it a little bit with the distributor. It's at 35 degrees, so that's perfect. So now that our timing is set, I'm super happy with where it is. We can go ahead and tighten down our distributor again, because we don't want this sucker to move. There we go. It's pretty snug. Now, if you're driving your car around and you're getting a bunch of pinging, that means you need to either put better fuel in, higher octane, or you can retard the timing a little bit. You lose a little bit of performance, but honestly, it's not that much. So another tip I have for you is that if you're driving your car around after you've set the timing, just like we've done, and you're putting pedal to the metal and it starts pinging, let off of the gas. That pinging can actually lead to damaging your engine or even destroying it. Pinging is not good. It's better to be on the more retarded side of timing than the too advanced side of timing. So either up your fuel or retard your timing slightly. So here is our vacuum gauge. I have it connected to the very bottom port of the carburetor. It's a little hard to see. There's another port just here at the end of my index finger, but that will only see vacuum above the butterfly valves. We don't want that. We want absolute vacuum basically at the intake manifold, and this port on our carburetor is going to be able to let us see that. So we're going to pay attention to this, and this is going to tell us our most optimal amount of vacuum while we are adjusting our carburetor. Basically, the needle is going to go up, and we're gonna play with these idle adjustment screws. There's 4 of them on our particular carburetor. It's a 4-corner system, and it's going to wind itself up, and then it's going to drop back down. So we want to erase that dropping back down. So we want to, tinker with the screws until we get basically the most amount of vacuum we can. So we can see our gauge, our needle's hanging right around 5 inches of mercury. So we can play with this idle adjustment screw, one at each corner, and watch that vacuum change. Oh, too much. See, I pivoted the screw to the right, and that starved the engine, so I'm gonna let it have a little bit more. See, that was too much. Now I'm rotating it back to the middle a little bit more. So now we're about, seems like it's bouncing up to 7. So we just want to keep doing that round and round at all 4 corners. We're going to watch this vacuum go up and then come back down, and we want to keep that vacuum, I mean, basically as high as we can. So while I was adjusting this corner, I found a really good sweet spot that demonstrates the point perfectly. So as I wind this in, you can see the vacuum dropping. So I back it out to give it more fuel, so the vacuum increases. Oh, too much. So right there is about perfect. Do that all 4 corners. So while we were adjusting our idle, going round and round and round, our gauge went to about 10 inches of mercury there. That's how much vacuum we were pulling. So that tells us right about what power valve we want. We want those power valves in the front and rear to be at around 8, 8.5. That comes in some kits. Holley makes them. Link down below in the description for those. We actually already put those in, so we're good to go there, and we can go ahead and remove our gauge. Go. Don't forget to replace the vacuum cap there, and then I can remove our gauge. All right, and I can hear you guys typing already. What about the jets? How do you know which jet to use in the front and rear? Awesome question, and we're gonna go over it right now. So let's go ahead and talk about carburetor and kind of tuning. This isn't really gonna be a carburetor tuning episode. I might do a carburetor tuning guide, but that's gonna be in the future. We're focusing on the big blocks. This is gonna be a little general. These are the 2 kits you absolutely have to have if you have a carburetor. You need a rebuild kit that has power valves and different gaskets and little screws and little E-clips and all kinds of little teeny tiny parts you might need. Just go ahead and buy one of these. They're not terribly expensive. You can get them pretty much everywhere. I think I got this one off Amazon of all places. And then a really important part is your jet kit. Again, you're gonna need this, and it has a bunch of different size jets. So these jets control the amount of fuel going into the engine, and they're accorded by size. So over here you have 64, and it goes all the way to number 99, and 64 is obviously smaller than 99, so 64 is going to let less fuel in than a 99 will. So you're gonna play with these different jet changes on these primary and secondary metering blocks, and the way you're gonna cipher that is based off of your spark plugs. No, this isn't a used spark plug, it's a new one, but it'll demonstrate my point. So you can take your spark plug out, and this isn't for a race application, this is for a street, this is for us street guys. If your spark plug's all nice and white on the end of it, it is too lean. You need more fuel. Now, if it's really sooty and dark and black, kind of looks like somebody maybe spray painted it black, it is too rich. There is too much fuel, you need to take jet out. So if it's white, put jet in, you make the jet sizes bigger. If it is black, take jet out, make the jet sizes smaller. That's a good rule of thumb. So on these spark plugs too, if the ends are all black, that's carbon. It's what's called carbon fouled. And what happens is carbon can conduct electricity, and the porcelain in here is no longer isolating, it's no longer insulating, and it can ground out, and then they just don't work because that bridges the gap, and you're not actually getting any spark between the electrode and the strap here. So if they're black, throw them out, they're junk. If they're white, you can probably get away with running them again. And for the crowning jewel, the final part of our big block is our 14-inch air cleaner that matches our valve covers. This is a Chevrolet performance licensed part made by Holley for our 4150. And check how cool that looks. Oh, it's gonna look awesome on our valve covers, because our valve covers, of course, have a very similar design, which is always cool. And it came with some gaskets. So let's put the carb stud on, and then we can install our air filter. So now I can put on our carb stud. I already have a jam nut on there to kind of lock it down in place. Put this as far down as you can by hand. Grab our jam nut, slink that on down. And that's a 1/2 inch. So just snug it up. Doesn't have to be Hulk tight, just snug is good. And then we can put our cork gasket on. Make sure that's nice and seated, perfect. So on this air cleaner, you can see that it has 2 bulbs basically at the top and bottom. And you just want those to go on our float bowls. Just like that, because if you try putting it on not that way, it won't fit. So you gotta mount it just right, just like that. So these bulbs here stick out on top of our float bowls. And then we have our air filter material. There we go. Just make sure that is nice. Just make sure that is nice and seated, which it is. And then our air cleaner lid. Again, you just want to make sure everything's nice and concentric so it actually seals and filters air. That's, you know, its job. And here it is, ladies and gentlemen, the last nut or fastener that goes on our big block Chevy is the wing nut for our air cleaner lid. And you just want to, yeah, finger tight's good. Just like that, perfect. So now we can finally shut our hood and drive this thing out of the shop. How to basically finish off your big block. This is now ready to hit the streets. Honestly, I can't quite drive my Camaro around just yet. You might have seen it's, well, missing a windshield and some lights and some basic things like that to make it road legal. So unfortunately, I can't take my Camaro out on the road, but if you had your project vehicle a little more legal, you certainly could. So that means that this video series is coming to a close. We might do a carburetor tuning and rebuild series in the future, but I want to keep that its own separate thing that really feels like its own separate thing because it's applicable to small blocks and big blocks and boat guys and a bunch of other things. So I want to kind of keep that its own thing. So this will be the final big block video. I also want to explain that our idle mixture is, it's a bit of a dance. You know, you're going to want to play with it here and there, and you know, if it seems a little rich, then lean it out. If it seems a little lean, then richen it up at idle. And because we have a big cam, it's not going to take as much vacuum as like a smaller or stock cam. So that's why you might have seen that our vacuum was a bit lower than, you know, you might have thought previously. It's because we have a big hydration cam, and that's so it sounds good and goes good. And even the weather can actually affect that idle emulsion mixture. So like back in the day, my dad on his big block Chevy and his Mustang had a winter setting and a summer setting. So when the weather cooled off, he would, you know, adjust the idle again, and when it warmed up, you adjust the idle again. That's just the nature of the beast of the carburetor. It's not fuel injection. You are going to have to play with it. You are going to have to dance with it, and honestly, that's kind of the fun of these cars. They require work. They require know-how to just drive them. That's pretty cool. You know, it's not just anybody can get in it and go, but now you can because you know what to do. An enormous thank you for watching. All of you people commenting and liking, showing your support, sending me private messages on Instagram or on Facebook has been absolutely incredible. I love talking to everybody about this big block series. I've seen quite a few people say now they're stoked to find the series because now they're going to build their big block themselves. I love reading that. Please, please, please tell me how your guys' engine builds are going. I want to see them running. I want to hear them. I want to hear everything about it. Thank you so much for watching. I can't tell you how grateful I am for you being here. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on future engine builds and automotive repair tutorials I have coming up. And I'll catch you next time.